Hello, Wingapo, and welcome to my channel. My name's Amanda, and I'm happy that you're here. Today, I'm joined by my cat Sebastian for our fall series we've got going on. Our slumber party, ghostly bedtime story mixed with popcorn, I'm the chosen reader for the story type video. We've been reading stories from 100 Wild Little Weird Tales. And today's number that has been randomly generated is number 35. So we are going to read story 35 out of 100 together. So grab a beverage, kick back, and let's get into it. Prost. Okay, just to give you a little bit of backstory, these are short horror stories that were published in a magazine called Weird Tales that was on the market from 1923 to 1954. So if the language in the story comes off a little bit stilted and a little bit strange at times, it's because we don't really speak that way anymore, but they did back then. So with that disclaimer, also, this is just for fun. Please don't sue me for copyright infringement. We're just here to have a good time reading stories together. So please, let's have some fun. Today's story is called The Gloves by Garnett Radcliffe. Oh no. What kind of trouble are we going to get into with some gloves? We're about to find out. I hadn't gone into Mr. Robinson's shop to buy gloves. I had gone in hoping to find among the miscellany of junk that filled the place literally from floor to ceiling a bracket for a shaving cabinet. And I was poking about when the gloves caught my eye. They were on a chair near the door, and I did not at once realize that they were for sale. "One of your customers has left his gloves behind," I told Mr. Robinson. "You better put them somewhere safe, for he may come back for them." Mr. Robinson, who is middle-aged and worried-looking, clicked his tongue, a sign of annoyance. "I'd have sworn I'd put 'em away," he said. "Getting absent-minded in my old age, that's what I am. No, they haven't been left behind. I gave that ferrety-faced loafer Joe Larkin 10 bob for them the other day. 'Spect he pinched 'em, but that's not my business. You can feel the quality. Real hog skin, those gloves are." I examined them. They were genuine hogskin with a wool lining, and they had been very little worn. "How much?" I asked. 12 and 6 to you," Mr. Robinson said. "They're a bargain. Last you a lifetime, those will." As it happened, I needed a pair of gloves, having left my own much inferior ones on a bus a few days before. When I tried them on and found that they fitted perfectly, the chance of obtaining a first-class article at a very moderate price overcame my dislike of second-hand goods. 12 and 6 it is," I said. When I'd returned to the bachelor flat I was renting in that beehive called the Harbinger Mansions, I examined my purchase again. Yes, they were excellent gloves and practically unsoiled, except just inside each wrist, where both wool linings had a ring of faint brownish stains. I told myself that no one would ever notice that and put them away in the top left-hand drawer of my chest of drawers. I don't keep a diary, nor have I a very retentive memory. What a quote. When I say it was about a week later that the first incident in connection with those gloves occurred, I am merely hazarding a guess. It was such a trivial incident that at the time it hardly registered itself on my mind. It was only when the subsequent happenings induced me to look back that I recalled it being the first chain of rather curious events. All that happened was that the gloves seemed to have moved themselves inside the drawer. When I went to take them out, it was a cold, wet morning, most appropriate for the wearing of wool-lined hog-skinned gloves. They were not stretched on a collar box, as I distinctly remembered having left them. They were on top of some socks in the front portion of the drawer, and the fingers were curled into the palms so that they looked like a pair of clenched fists. Of course, there was an obvious explanation. Mrs. Hubbard, the amiable lady who Did Out, my flat during my absence, must have been doing a bit of prying. She'd noticed the gloves, had taken them out to try them on her own fat hands, and had omitted to replace them as she'd found them. I decided I'd say nothing to Mrs. Hubbard. She was a good old soul whose services I wouldn't have risked losing for a half a dozen pair of gloves. I wore the gloves that day with satisfaction. They were warm and comfortable, and they looked good. A gentleman's gloves. I flattered myself. Gloves are a great conveyor of personality, and I could picture their previous owner. Their real owner, I mean, not the ferrety-faced Mr. Larkin who had sold them to Mr. Robinson, as having been the old-fashioned country squire type who appreciated good leather, sound horses, and a vintage port. It may seem ridiculous to deduce all that from a pair of gloves, but when I looked at these with their hallmark of quality and faint indentations on the palms as if they had once gripped reins, that was the very vivid impression I got. When I got back that night, they were too wet to be replaced in the drawer, so I put them on the back of the chair within reasonable distance of the radiator. So then came incident number 2, which can be just as easily explained away as the first. Presumably, I hadn't balanced them very well on the chair, or they were disturbed by a draught, for in the morning I had found they had fallen to the floor and rolled several feet away from the chair towards the window. Somehow, when I saw them lying on the carpet, backs uppermost and fingers spread out and slightly curved, I was put in mind of a man crawling on its face. The impression was so strong that I disliked picking them up. They still felt a little damp and, presumably because of the radiator, warm, as if they had been recently worn. After that there was a spell of fine weather during which I had no occasion to wear or to think of gloves. I'd quite forgotten them when one evening I was asking for my letters, the hall porter gave me a message. "Mrs. Hubbard, the lady who does your flat, thinks you've got mice, sir," he said. "If you've got no objection, I'll arrange for a trap to be left in the bedroom. Mice are not to be tolerated in a hive for humans such as Harbinger Mansions." I told the porter I thought a trap would be an excellent idea. That evening, it was the first thing I saw when I entered my bedroom. Probably on the advice of Mrs. Hubbard, it had been placed close to the chest of drawers. That night, I heard the mice myself. From the sounds they made, they were robust mice. Lying awake and furious, I could picture a couple of large rats romping about inside the chest of drawers. A rat hunt in pajamas and bare feet didn't appeal to me, so I pulled the sheets round my head and eventually, despite the scrabbling, scratching sounds, I fell asleep. Next morning, the trap was empty. I looked in the chest of drawers. Only the top left-hand drawer had been disturbed. In there, the rats had worked havoc. Handkerchiefs, socks, and collars had been flung about and mixed as if by a rake, and the paper which lined the bottom of the drawer had been scraped up and torn. I found the gloves almost hidden beneath the paper. I put the drawer to rights and went out cursing all rats. The following night was very similar, except that the rats were even more frisky. After listening to the scrabbling, bumping sounds for a couple of hours, I sprang out of bed in desperation and yanked open the drawer whence the sounds seemed to come. The contents had been disturbed and flung about, but no sign of a rat. I returned to bed, leaving the drawer open. I must have scared the rats, for silence followed. As I was dropping off to sleep, I thought I heard a soft flop, flop, as if the intruders had hopped from the drawer onto the carpet, but I was too weary to get up again. "Get, you brutes!" I hissed, and I turned deeper into the pillow. I didn't sleep as well that night as I usually do. Several times I half awoke to hear rats scampering about the room, and once I'd had an unpleasant nightmare in which a pair of soft, flabby hands seemed to be groping round my face and neck. My last recollection is of a sound of drumming at the window, as if someone were tapping on the glass with his fingers. He let the gloves out of the chest. Not good. In the morning, I found the rats had pulled the gloves out of the drawer. After a search, I found them beneath the chest of drawers whence I had to retrieve them with the crook of my umbrella. They were dusty and crumpled so that they had looked like a couple of dead crabs. Somehow, I disliked handling them. I wasn't going to suffer another night. After I put my drawer straight, I went down and spoke my mind to the hall porter. If he could not get rid of the rats, I threatened I would leave Harbinger Mansions. He promised strong measures. In the evening, I found a second trap had been installed, and poisoned bait had been left in strategic points. Hoping for the best, I went to bed early. I slept badly, and had a dream in which I saw a finger beckoning to me from the top of the chest of drawers. Then I dropped off, only to be woken a little later by the sound of my door opening as if someone had given it a violent jerk. I sat up. Sure enough, the door opening on the corridor was open. I could see the dim blue light which always burns in the corridor, and I could feel a cold draught. Cursing and rather scared, trying to assure myself I hadn't closed the door firmly, and the draught had blown it open. As I was about to close it, I heard a frightened yell from the direction of the main stairway. I hurried down the dim corridor, fearful of seeing I knew not what. On the landing, a figure cowered against the wall. It was one of the night porters, an elderly individual with a bibulous countenance and a ragged white mustache. As he pointed down the stairs, his hand shook and his face was ashen. "Spiders!" he gasped. "A couple of whopping great brown spiders! God, am I seeing things?" I told him that what he'd imagined to be spiders were in all probability the rats that had been haunting my bedroom. After a bit, I persuaded him to accompany me down the main stairway to the entrance hall, where we turned on lights and peered under chairs and sofas. There were no rats to be seen. I told the porter that what the Harbinger Mansions needed was a good fox terrier. They were spiders, he insisted. Rats don't run like this. And he illustrated what he meant by making his hands dart along the counter at the inquiry desk, the fingers moving very quickly so that they looked like the legs of running spiders. I wish he hadn't done that, for later on I had yet another creepy dream in which I was following a pair of hands that scuttled like crabs along wet streets and roads until they reached a dirty little house with no lights, where they groped up the wall and vanished through a broken window into a dark room. I seemed to hear then a scream like the hoot of a railway engine, and I woke, sweating and trembling. But at least the rats had left my room, never to return again. Apparently, they had either eaten the gloves or dragged them off with them for nesting purposes, for although I searched high and low, they were nowhere to be found. And is that the end of the story? Well, on that point, I'd rather not offer an opinion. But I will relate something that some readers may think casts a light on what happened in my flat. The facts came to me through the mouth of Mr. Robinson. I was poking about in his shop after my wont when he asked me if I still had the gloves I'd bought. "They'd vanished," I said, which was nearer the truth than if I'd just said I'd lost them. "Vanished, eh?" said Mr. Robinson. "Well, the fellow who sold them to me, that fare-thee-wastrel Joe Larkin, he's vanished too. Leastways, he's dead. He's been found strangled in his bed in that old condemned house of his by the Minchley railway line." "Strangled?" I repeated. "Yes, strangled," said Mr. Robinson. "And the police haven't a clue who did it. The murderer wore gloves, and he didn't leave a trace. What beats the police is how he got into the house with all the doors and windows fastened. They say he didn't leave so much as a footprint in the dust. Anyway, Joe Larkin was no loss. Do you know where I believe he got the gloves I sold you?" "Where?" I asked. "You remember the crash on the Minchley line when the London Express collided with a goods train? It happened in the cutting just below Joe's house. He was there all right, but I bet he didn't waste time helping people out of the wreckage. Loot. That would be Joe's game. I could just see him creeping round the burning coaches like the human rat he was. He'd had pinched the wallet off a dying man, or the shoes off a dead baby. I bet that's where he found those gloves." That was what Mr. Robinson told me. Later, curiosity caused me to go to a public library where I could read the back numbers of the papers reporting the Minchley crash. Among the list of killed, I remarked the name of a certain Colonel Belcher Price, an ex-hussar and MFH of the Minchley Hunt. It stated in the paper that he'd had both hands severed at the wrist when his first-class carriage was telescoped by a goods truck. I'll leave the reader to draw his or her own conclusions. ... And that, dear listener, is the end of the gloves. Okay, so in this story, we buy secondhand gloves. They scrabble around like rats in our dresser, and we let them out of the dresser, and while we're sleeping, and it gives me the shivers, they flop around our face. They could literally kill us. They don't seem to want to kill us. They escape, they go, and they kill the guy. If there's an accident, you need to help the people who are injured and not steal their stuff, because they will come back to haunt you. And not just haunt you, but physically hurt you and maim you. I feel like this is another well, you should have known better. If you hadn't have been a creep, you wouldn't have been... I do like the supernatural sort of element to it. Like the gloves are like supernaturally powered because they're gonna go get revenge. Obviously, Mr. Colonel didn't make it. He was reported as deceased. He might have had a chance of survival if that rat-faced man maybe would have helped him and not just taken the gloves. That would really piss me off too. Here's what I'm interested in. All right. Leave a comment down below. Why do you think that the gloves didn't come after the narrator? The gloves had every opportunity once he set them loose to strangle the narrator and then get out of the room and then go seek revenge on that other guy. Do you think that the gloves were just powered by revenge? Or do you think the gloves were evil and they were like, you know what? I need to go kill the first guy and then I need to come back and get the second guy. Do you think our narrator is still in danger? Do you think the gloves might come back and get him? Because that's kind of what I'm wondering at this point. I just want to be like, dude, watch out. You might not be in the clear. You're leaving this up to me, but I think you should be extra cautious, dude. But, that's just my opinion. I think that about does it for today. So I hope you're enjoying your autumn season. And if you liked this video, please give it a like and hit the subscribe button for more videos just like this, where we read a random story from 100 Wild Little Weird Tales. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers. Thank you, Sebastian, for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the story as well.